Hello, my name is Robert Steinbauer and I welcome you to another business ethics video. In the last video, we learned about ethical theories. These theories are normative and tell us what is ethical and what is unethical, and subsequently how we should act. However, these theories were developed by philosophers who, quite honestly, are okay with not providing clear answers. At the end of the last video, I asked you, what theory guides you the most? This is a great exercise to think about what belief system drives your decisions. Creating such an awareness can help you not only to understand yourself, but also others who may disagree with your opinion. Today, we talk about ethical decision making. Social scientists seem to have given up on studying what is ethical or unethical and focus now on studying human decision-making processes instead. They want to know how individuals make ethical or unethical decisions. So let's get started with Jones 1991, a classic paper on ethical decision-making in organizations. In 1991, Jones improved the research field's understanding of individuals' rational decision-making, the process of thinking before acting ethically or unethically. Again, I want to stress that this is a rational decision-making process, meaning you consciously make your decisions. Jones built his model on REST's 4 stages of ethical decision-making. Those 4 stages are recognizing the ethical issue, which is also called creating moral awareness, creating a moral judgment, forming moral intentions, and finally engaging in moral behavior. Specifically, Jones proposed that these 4 stages are influenced by the characteristics of the moral issue, which Jones called moral intensity. While this sounds very obvious, of course, moral intensity affects my decision making. Before Jones published this paper, most scholars did not consider the moral intensity as an important aspect. They simply assumed that all moral decisions follow the exact same cognitive process as outlined by REST: awareness, judgment, intentions, and behavior. You steal a pencil from work is no different from robbing a bank. Jones specifically postulated that the moral intensity of an act is influenced by 6 factors. First, we have the magnitude of consequences. The magnitude of consequences of the moral issue is defined as the sum of all harms or benefits done to the victims or beneficiaries of the moral act in question. For example, causing a particular injury to 1,000 people is of greater magnitude of consequence than causing the same harm to only 1 person. The higher the magnitude of consequence, the more likely you will be to recognize the moral issue. It will also affect your moral judgment, moral intentions, and of course your behavior. Organizations often have to calculate the risk to customers and bystanders, and the magnitude of consequence plays an important role, as we will see in a little bit when we talk about the Ford Pinto case. The next aspect of moral intensity is social consensus. Jones defined social consensus of the moral issue as the degree of social agreement that a proposed act is evil or good. Imagine you drive on a highway in Canada. The speed limit on the QW is 100 kilometers an hour. If every car were to drive the speed limit, if every car were to drive 100 kilometers an hour, or at least not exceed 100 kilometers an hour, the social consensus would be not to speed. In this hypothetical scenario, if you would drive 130 kilometers an hour, you would clearly violate the social consensus. However, in my experience, most cars on Canadian highways travel somewhere between 120 and 130 kilometers an hour. So, to me, 130 kilometers an hour still seems to be acceptable, in my opinion. So if all cars travel at 130 kilometers an hour, I don't think much and just blend in. However, if suddenly all cars around me drive 100 kilometers an hour, what's going to happen? Well, first, I will immediately start to look around for where's the police. And maybe I will even slow down, which clearly shows that this violation of a social consensus increases my moral awareness. Me looking around affects my judgment, intentions, and behavior. Next, we have the probability of the effect of the moral act in question. Jones defines this aspect of moral intensity as a joint function of the probability that the act in question will actually take place and the act in question will actually cause harm or benefit. For example, we know that cars can be hazardous, but producing a car that is dangerous to passengers while driving on a highway has greater probability of harm than producing a car that endangers passengers only during rear-end collisions. Of course, the higher the probability of the harm, the more likely I will create moral awareness. And of course, subsequently, the more my moral judgment, my intentions, and my behavior will be affected. Next, we talk about the temporal immediacy. The temporal immediacy of the moral issue is the length of time between the present and the onset of the consequences of the moral act in question, where a short length of time implies greater immediacy. For example, releasing a product that will cause 1% of the customers severe problems as soon as they use it has greater temporal immediacy than releasing the same product, but it will only cause 1% of the customers severe problems after, let's say, 5 years. Again, if you know that immediately after the usage something bad is going to happen to them, you will be more cautious. You will be more aware of the moral issue. Next, we have the proximity of the moral issue. The proximity of the moral issue is the feeling of social, cultural, psychological, or physical nearness that the moral agent has for victims or beneficiary of the evil or the good act in question. For example, laying off employees at the home plant in person has greater physical and psychological moral proximity than simply signing an order to lay off employees in a remote plant. So, the final aspect of moral intensity is called concentration of the effect. The concentration of the effect of the moral act is an inverse function of the number of people affected by the act. For example, stealing a given sum from one individual or a small group of individuals has a more concentrated effect than stealing the same amount from a large organization. That's it. Now you know about REST's 4 stages: awareness, judgment, intentions, and behavior. And you also know about moral intensity. So now take a moment and think which aspect of rational decision making is the most important to you. Also, think about when was the last time you actually made a rational, ethical, or unethical decision. To what extent did you go through the 4 stages? Maybe you jaywalked, cheated during an exam, or lied to a friend. It probably does not happen that often that you make conscious decisions anymore. Which raises the question, how can individuals make unethical decisions or ethical decisions without being aware of it?